Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special presentation. Abba Shapiro, who is our co-director for Skylum Education, will be demonstrating how to use Luminar as a plugin within Lightroom. So this will be a very enlightening presentation. We hope that you enjoy it, so sit back and relax. And Abba, thank you so much for presenting this wonderful topic to us today.
Well, thank you, Laurie, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is going to be a lot of fun because this is a little different than our previous webinars, and that's because we're working with Luminar and Lightroom Classic together. And I know a lot of folks currently are using Lightroom Classic, and Luminar works as an amazing plugin. They really dovetail together really well. And what I really like about using Luminar as a plugin for Lightroom is I have a lot of fellow photographers that don't necessarily subscribe to the cloud, and they're using their last owned version of Lightroom, and it's really limited in, it's getting updated to work with new cameras, but not necessarily new features. So by adding Luminar as a plugin, it really updates that owned version. And it also works beautifully with the subscribed version. That's what I'm using right now, the subscribed version of Lightroom. And I'm going to show you how you can go back and forth and leverage your current workflow if you're organizing in Lightroom and taking advantage of Luminar's plugins. And also if there are features and functionality within Lightroom that you want to use, and you can actually access Lightroom from directly inside of Luminar. And I'm going to show you some of the tricks and techniques, and hopefully those who have been even using it, you'll learn some new tricks. But let's get started and talk about the first thing that you're going to need to do or make sure that you have done to make sure that these two applications work well together. And that is to make sure that the plugin is installed in Lightroom. And you're asked this when you first install Luminar, but if you chose not to install the plugin, it's very easy to do. If you go underneath where it says Luminar on your application, you'll see there's an option for install plugins. And when you click on that, you'll see that it will show where the Luminar plugins are already installed, and depending on your operating system, which applications you can maybe also install it to. Now, if you haven't installed it, you can simply click on install. Now, I've done that, and I'm not going to uninstall it because I don't want to try to crash my applications during the webinar. But for instance, if I had, say, Adobe Photoshop Elements on this system, I could install that by simply clicking the install button. So that's the first thing you need to do, and it will install the plugins. Now, there are two ways that you can work with Luminar and Lightroom together. You can start in Lightroom, and you can start in Luminar. That's where I am right now. And a lot of folks are using Luminar now for its library features. It has great library features, the ability to just search very easily, find photos from the same day. It's very fast in bringing in photos. As a matter of fact, literally as Laurie was talking, I grabbed this entire folder from Westcliff because I wanted to try something, and this is working without a net, possibly if we have time, to do some merge HDR panoramas, which is something Lightroom can do. So we may try to do that, but it loaded very quickly. So I have this library and I can work at that. And if there's an image I wanted to send to Lightroom or multiple images, it's very easy. I can simply go and select whatever image I want. So this is an image that I worked on recently. And if I go to the upper right-hand corner, I can go to the export option. And, many of you may have used it exporting an image, getting out of Luminar a TIFF file or a JPEG or a PNG or mailing something. But you can also open an image or multiple images in a lot of these other applications, such as Photoshop and Lightroom. So if I wanted to send this to Lightroom, I could simply say open in Lightroom. It's going to go to export. I have the images that I want to export here, and I can choose that, and I can go ahead and bring that into Lightroom. And it's very easy. So if I wanted to bring that in, I would simply check it. And I want to point something out, and I'll probably revisit this again as I go back and forth. There'll be a lot of back and forth between Lightroom and Luminar in this webinar, is that when you do this, you want to make sure that you don't do it as an ad. that you do it either as a move or preferably, in my mind, a copy. If it is a raw file coming from Luminar, you might want to convert it to a DNG, a digital negative, if you haven't made any modifications to it. But if you do add, it will temporarily bring it in, but the operating systems will actually put it in a temporary folder. So when you restart your computer, the temporary folder, which is in your system, disappears, and suddenly it won't be able to find the image because it's kind of moving it. So it's an important thing for you to be successful to either do copy, which is my preference, or if it's a raw file, you can copy it as a DNG. So I'm going to go copy, and I'll go import, and now it brings this image into my Lightroom catalog, and I can work with it as I would any image that I would bring into Lightroom. Now, I really like the features that are available in Luminar for developing an image, so I tend to work the other way. But for instance, I might have brought this image in, and I perhaps might want to see if I have any spots or sensor dust. So that's one of the things that I find Lightroom does really, really well, is I can go ahead and click and find my sensor dust. If I hit the T key, I can visualize my spots. It actually, I'm pretty sure that I luckily cleaned off my lens here before, but let's suppose that was sensor dust. I could go in and use the fact that Lightroom can click on that, and I can go ahead and remove that. I probably want to do a clone and get rid of my sensor dust. And once I've done that, I could go ahead and continue to work with this in Lightroom, or I could right click and I could send this back to Luminar. Now, that's easy to do. I want to actually start with some different images, but if I send this back, there are a couple of different ways that you can move your files or your images from Lightroom into Luminar to take advantage of the power of Luminar. And so if I go over here, and let me just not go to the drop down within there, the right click, but I'm going to go to File, and I can go ahead and export that with a preset. And as you see, Luminar 3 is here, and I can choose to either send it to Luminar as its original source file without any of the modifications I might have done in Lightroom, or I can edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. This is one way of doing it. I'll show you another way in a moment that's great when working with RAW and DNG files. So if I say edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, I can go ahead and do that. It will then send this over to Luminar. I should have this image twice here. If I hit the gallery key or the G key to go full in my library. Oh, actually, when you send something over, you're working with that image temporarily in that space. So if I sent this over, I'm working with this, I could go ahead, add some filters. I'm going to go with the Quick and Awesome workspace. So now I've sent an image over. I can add my accent AI to kind of pump up the image here a little bit, makes it pop. The sky's pretty good. I don't think it needs much enhancement, so just a little bit. I want to pull down the saturation, but add the vibrance. This will kind of even things out, and maybe add a little bit of clarity. And I like this, and I'm going to continue to add a couple of more filters to this image. There's over 50 filters available in Luminar, which is really nice. So I can take any image that I work with in Lightroom, send it over to Luminar, and I have a lot of options to work with to quickly process this or to detail process this. As you saw, I have some really nice, using artificial intelligence ways to enhance my image, the Accent AI filter and the Sky Enhancer filter. When I use these, as a matter of fact, if you're new to Luminar, when I move that slider to the right, it's actually using artificial intelligence to analyze the tonality of my image and opening up my shadows and recovering my highlights, increasing the contrast a little bit of sharpening. About 12 different things are happening under the hood, all controlled by one slider. And in the case of all our artificial intelligence filters, what we've done is we've used machine learning and loaded in something to the effect of like 80,000 images before and after that were actually hand processed by photographers. And the machine learns what really happens. It recognizes sky and foreground and whatnot, and does its best calculations. And as I move that slider, it enhances the image. The same thing works when I work with the sky enhancer. So in this case, it recognizes sky, and when I move it over, it knows to increase the contrast so the clouds come out, but they don't turn blue. And it also can determine if it's sky versus water or other blue things in the area. So it's a lot smarter than, say, using a polarizing filter. And then, as you see, I did saturation and clarity. So a couple things I might want to do is just some basic elements. So I could go ahead and throw a nice little vignette on this to focus it. So I have my vignette, and I can bring that down just a little bit. And I can go ahead and bring in inner light to focus. And I can even place the center of that vignette exactly where I want it. As a matter of fact, if I pull the feather down and pull this down a little bit, I can see my exact shape of my vignette and my position of it. And then I can pull that back and pull my feather back, and I can just get a nice subtle vignette. Now, I know a lot of folks who work with Lightroom also may have come and used Photoshop filters, and you want some of those more powerful filters, and we have those in Luminar. So for instance, I have HSL, hue, saturation, and luminance. And if I select that, I can go in here and I can say, you know what? I really want to pump up the saturation of those sunflowers. And I move that to the right, and you notice just the yellow is getting saturated. I can go ahead and maybe bring up the red in the dress, or I can even go over to hue and change the red tone of the dress. So I have a lot of power here within Luminar to process any image that I send to Lightroom, or any image I send from Lightroom to Luminar. When I'm done processing this image, all I have to do is click Apply. It's going to do all the calculations, and it's going to return a 16-bit TIFF image to my Lightroom catalog. So here I have my Lightroom catalog. Let me jump back to my library. There was my previous import, but I'm going to go to All Photographs and just scroll down here to the bottom. And there we go. This was my before. Oh my gosh, it just kind of got confused. Lightroom got confused there for a second. So this was my before that actually I sent over from Lightroom. And when I processed it within Luminar as a plugin to Lightroom, I got this image out. And now I can use any kind of organizational structure that I'm used to in Lightroom. It can be in my catalog. I can export it. I have a lot of power. So this is really a great feature. So let me jump back and talk a little bit about other things you can do in Luminar to get into Lightroom. And then I want to show you some things you can do in Lightroom that Lightroom does really well, such as panoramas and merging HDR as well as HDR panoramas. That's a new feature that was added in one of the latest versions of Lightroom CC. And let's go ahead, and I'm going to simply toggle back and forth between Luminar and Lightroom. So we're back into Luminar. I'm going to hit the G key. That will take me to my gallery view. And if I wanted to, now I'm looking at just my quick edits. Now, I'm not going to spend much time explaining the nuances of the Luminar library. We have other webinars that do that. Laurie will point you to those at the end of this webinar. I really want to focus my energies here on the relationship between Lightroom and Luminar for those of you out there who are currently using a Lightroom catalog system, and it benefits you to be able to leverage the power of Luminar as a plugin. Okay, so we have the ability to work with images. One thing I do like about Luminar over Lightroom is its speed when loading a catalog. And as I indicated, I loaded a whole bunch of images before. So it sometimes is just a great way to help me organize images. As you can see here, I have a series of what I am attempting to do is a panorama and bracketed images that I would bring into Lightroom to work with, and hopefully we will get to that. So I have all my images organized here, and I can very easily sort things out. So if I wanted to go and find, say, all of the images that I shot here, I could simply right-click on this and say, you know what? Go to everything I shot from this date. Okay, and it shows me a whole bunch of images. And I did a little bit of testing here. These are all actually shot with a DJI Mavic. So I'm sorry, the Mavic Pro. I don't know if there was a Mavic and not a Mavic Pro, but this was the Mavic Pro. I don't want people to say, what did he use there? And I shot some panoramas, and I could go in and I could, the Mavic will merge things together, and I could get some nice images. And let's say I grab, this is a sunrise image that I shot with the Mavic. I could go in and edit this, and I'm going to bring it into my edit mode, and then I can add filters. Or if I wanted to, one of the nice things about Luminar is it does have this ability to apply looks, which a lot of people might consider very similar to presets. So I could simply go in here, open an image in Luminar, go to the AI image enhancer. That's one of our basic looks. When I double click on that, it actually will apply a series of filters with those settings already, with the sliders already set, are developed on this image. But what I like about looks over presets are something we're used to using in Lightroom, is that if I feel this is too much, if I apply a look, such as maybe the contrast enhancer or the sky enhancer, and I feel it's too much, here's light and airy, all of these can be dialed back and blended with the original. And that's a really nice feature that I have. So I could go back to the AI image enhancer, and of course I could dial it back. But what's more important is not only are these developed modules live, but in addition to being able to blend them with the source material, the 4 filters it put on to get this look are also adjustable. So if I look at this and I say, you know what, I need to open up the exposure, I can. I'm not locked into on or off as with a preset. It's really just a starting point. And in addition to the 4 settings that I have here, the 4 filters it put in automatically, I can add additional filters to any of the looks that I apply, as well as remove any filters that I may not want to use. So for instance, what I may want to add here is, well, let's look, we have the sky enhancer. It did a nice job, but I think I might want to punch it a little bit more. So one of the things I can do in Luminar is I can simply right click, I'll go to this drop down, there we go, and I can duplicate any of my filters, and I can really push my sky enhancer and really bring that in. The other thing I can do is I can add additional filters. So for instance, one of the filters I really like to work with when I'm working with any kind of a sunrise or a sunset is my adjustable gradient. So I can click on that, and I can actually set the orientation. So of course my horizon line is down here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tighten that up, the threshold or the softness between the bottom and the top. And now I can go ahead and adjust things. So on the top, if I wanted to, I could bring the exposure up or down. I could increase the contrast a little bit. I think I'm going to warm this up to give me a nice warmer sunrise, and I can even pump up the vibrance. Then I can jump over to the bottom here, and I can go ahead, and in this case, maybe I want to open up the exposure on the water, and I can go ahead and either warm that up or cool that off, depending on stylistically how I feel that should be. And again, modify this. So this is without that adjustable gradient. This is with it. And as a matter of fact, if I go to the top right here, I can see what this image was like before and after. So I have a lot of power. So I could start in Lightroom and send it over to Luminar, or start in Luminar. And then if I wanted to, if I like this and I wanted to keep this in my library, I could go ahead, click on this, and I could either export this as a TIFF file or a JPEG that I can then bring into Lightroom or put into a folder that I could then catalog. Or as you saw earlier, I could go ahead, send it directly to Lightroom at this point in time. And then I have the option here. This is the image I want to work with. I could have sent multiple images over. And as I said before, I want to bring this in as a copy versus an add. And now I have this inside of my Lightroom catalog, and I can work with it as I am used to. So that's really nice. Let me go ahead and actually open up my entire Lightroom catalog while we're here. So we have a variety of images. So here's an example of a workflow that I may do. And I shot there's a lot of DJI panoramas that I threw in here that I wanted to work with, but I'm going to work with just a single image first. And we'll just go with this image right here. So I could go ahead and I could do some initial developing of this image if I choose to, leveraging the power of Lightroom. And there's a lot of new things. I believe under photo, they have this great little feature called enhanced details that came out just, I think this month, that will work on any kind of a raw image. And what it does is you can bring it in, it can show you what the enhanced does before and after. It's going to do some calculations. Depending on the size and complexity of the image, it tells you how long it's going to take. I'm going to go ahead and enhance this. I'm actually working on a system that isn't very powerful. I don't like demoing on super fast systems because then when people go to try and do what I'm doing, they're like, well, why is my machine so much slower? So actually, this machine I'm working on, it is a Mac, but we work equally as well on a PC, doesn't even have an external graphics processing unit, an external video card. It's the video card that's on the motherboard. So that's why it took a little bit longer. So this added some detail. I'm working in this image here. I might go ahead and do the same thing, see if I have any sensor spots. So I click over here on my my tool. I'm going to visualize spots that's down at the bottom and just see. And luckily, usually with my still cameras, I get a lot of sensor spots because I change lenses sometimes at the beach, which is the worst thing to do, but I do it and I get sensor spots. But if I wanted to, I could have fixed those. And now that I have, this image detailed, I can send it back over to Luminar. Now, this is something that may be new to some of you. Let me go ahead and click this off so we're back into our normal developing. I could do some processing here. I do find that the raw develop engine in Luminar and some of the features in Luminar are a little more powerful than Lightroom. I have layers to work with. I have blending modes to work with in Luminar. So I think I want to do all my work in Luminar, but I don't want to go ahead and do the normal export, which is export with a preset, because what this will do is, it's great for most purposes, but since this is already raw, when I send anything over using export with a preset, by its nature, Lightroom turns it into a 16-bit TIFF image, which is great in some cases. But I love all the detail that I have in this raw image, and it would be great to work with this as a raw or a digital negative inside of Luminar, and I can do that. And the secret is go into plugin extras. And if you go to plugin extras and you move this over and you say transfer, as a matter of fact, you can see here, I can also send it to Aurora HDR, our sister application to Luminar. That's our high dynamic range application. But I'm going to go here and I'm going to transfer it to Luminar. So what happens at this point is instead of sending a TIFF, it sends a digital negative file, a DNG file. So I have all of that latitude that I have in my original image to open up and find and control all the details here. As you can see right here, it says Pano DNG. And I can go ahead and start adding filters. I could go and try, if I wanted to, go with some of the presets here to see if I can get to a good starting point. But for those of you who haven't used Luminar, I'm going to go ahead and do it from scratch here. So I'm going to go ahead and close my Looks panel, give me a little bit more real estate to work with. And then I'm going to start adding filters that I want. Now I can add filters one by one. I click on Add Filter. I could go ahead and bring in my raw develop filter and bring it over, and probably the AI filter. But one of the other things I can do is there are something called workspaces in Luminar. And if I click on where it says clear workspace, which means there are no filters there, there are some preset workspaces that will bring in a series of filters with none of their settings adjusted. So basically, it just kind of does what I would have done manually, bring in 6 or 8 filters, and you can start working with them. So for instance, if I clicked on Quick and Awesome, I now have the Accent AI, Sky Enhancer, Saturation and Vibrance, and Clarity to work with. And of course, I could add more, as you saw earlier in the webinar. If I switched over to, say, aerial photography, I have a whole bunch of different filters to start working with. And again, I could go in here under, say, landscape, and it's a slightly different variety of filters to work with, such as my raw develop filter. So let's go ahead and start with this as a beginning point. I can use these or not use these. And you'll see I'm going to go to raw develop, and to open these up, I can just click on them and it reveals all the sliders to work with. And for those of you who are used to using histogram, I have a histogram up here. As a matter of fact, I can even turn on a little button here on the left and right so I can see my hot pixels and my cold pixels. Those will be the pixels that would be blown out if I make this image too bright, or pixels that would be below 0 black if I crushed my shadows too much. So I can get that feedback. So for instance, if I go ahead and overexpose this, you can see I'm losing detail in the sky. I'm getting that feedback. And if I move my exposure to the left and underexpose it, I would be losing detail here in the foreground. It's a nice feature to have. I'm going to turn it off for right now because I want to focus on how I would develop this image. So I could go ahead and I could just go ahead and open this up, brighten this up a little bit. I'm blowing my sky out a little bit here, but it's a good place to start. I just really wanted to open this up, and I have a lot of controls here in this raw develop that keeps this nice and clean. In addition to being able to adjust to process my image, I do have the ability to correct for lens distortion. So it can look at the information within the file to see how it would fix that. I can also do some of this manually. If I had any kind of chromatic aberration from really bright and dark areas, or maybe the edges of my lens, I could turn that on and it will fix the fringing with the chromatic aberration and also the defringe. I don't necessarily have this. If I did want to see if there were problems, it's very easy to zoom into 100%. Right now I'm fitting to the window, but if I hit Command or Control 1, it will bring my image to 100%. I can hit Command or Control 0 to make it fit to the screen, and of course use my mouse wheel to scroll in at any point just to see detail. So that's the ease of use of the application. Let me go ahead and hit Control 0, Command 0 to bring this to full screen. In addition to these abilities, to remove vignetting on some of those extreme wide angle lenses, I can also go to Transform here, and if I wanted to, I could rotate this so it's even. It's pretty even as it is. If there was some parallax distortion, I could fix that with my vertical and horizontal options. So there's a lot of power under the hood, just even in this one filter. I'm going to leave these as they are because there's no need to adjust them really. I'm going to actually adjust this little bit of crooked horizon using another function. But I could go down and I'm going to start processing this, and I'm going to try to do it kind of quickly because I want you to see how fast you can take an image that's otherwise plain and really soup it up. So I'm going to use the Accent AI filter. I had explained that before. It does a lot of things. Look how I move it to the right. It really starts bringing out that detail in the foreground. And it's a little blue for my taste, but we're going to fix that because I can go back and forth. The other thing you'll notice is as I've modified these filters, they turn from white to orange. And that's really nice because now at a glance, I can see which filters I've adjusted and which I haven't. It's very easy, by the way, if I want to see what a filter looks or what the image looks like without a filter, I can click on an eyeball to the right of that filter and turn it on and off. I also have the ability to create masks on any filter that I apply, as well as to the entire layer. We won't do that right now because I want to start processing the image. I want to enhance my sky. So I'll click on that, move that over till I'm comfortable. It really makes it pop a little bit. I can bring in that adjustable gradient. These were all brought in because I chose the landscape option for my workspace. And once again, the first thing I like to do is make sure that my horizon line is fine. Bring that in, tighten that up, put that in position. I will straighten this in a moment, but right now I just want to process the image. And so for the top, the exposure, maybe bring it down a little bit. I want to warm it up. I want to get a really kind of a vibrant, warm sunset there. That's really kind of nice. I like what it's doing. And, play with the contrast a little bit. And now I can go to the bottom. And the nice thing here is, look what I can do. I can go ahead and warm up and really push the warmth here and bring up the vibrance a little bit. It still's a little bit blue. We're going to work on that in a moment. And I could open up the exposure of the bottom a little bit here. So I can sit and go down and work with a lot of these filters. I can add some things such as a dehaze filter, or if I want to give it a little more of that sunset, I can add a little bit of golden hour. Quite a bit of control here, a little bit of a vignette. I'm going to actually go back up to the raw develop and just take away some of that blue in my image. And there, that kind of neutralizes that a little bit. But let's say I wanted to do that on just part of the image, okay? I could go ahead and I could process this. And if I wanted to, I could add another layer. And I just want to point this out. This is one of the things we don't have in Lightroom, is I can click on this plus key and add another layer that's either an adjustment layer or a new image if I wanted to be able to bring some texture in, or if I wanted to be able to add some different clouds. I can go ahead and I can do that. Let me make sure I turn off my set orientation for that. And I'm going to, if I wanted to, I could say, oh, not add a filter. I could add a filter, but I want to show you an adjustment layer. Added a new adjustment layer. Let's go ahead, add another develop. And in this case, I'm going to warm it up because I really want to see if I can fix that ground there. I'm going to go ahead, open up the exposure, and just kind of get that a little bit more towards the golden and the brown. Don't like what it does to my sun. So this is a great feature. Remember I said you can easily put in masks. I'm going to click right there. I'm going to choose a gradient mask. And here I can very quickly draw a mask so that I just have it affect the bottom part of my image and not the top. And I could paint things in and I'm getting something I really like. Now it's starting to drive me a little bit crazy, the fact that that horizon line isn't perfectly flat, and I think I want to work with a slightly different aspect ratio. So I can go in here under my tools and I can go to crop. And while I'm here, I do want to point out, we have features such as the ability to clone and stamp areas to remove things from a shot if you have a problem with it, or to erase parts of an image. So that power is there. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and crop this. And the nice thing is that in addition to being able to crop, I can change my angle, or I can go ahead and straighten this. So I'm going to straighten that horizon just a little bit. I uncheck this little lock here, and that gives me free control to crop this as I please. And I want to create this more of a panorama. There we go. And maybe I want to do this for Facebook. So instead of going here to free reign, you can see square, Instagram. I can do Facebook cover. There we go. That's the exact aspect ratio for a Facebook cover. Go ahead and position this, hit done, and now I have this nice image. It might be, actually, I think it's the way the sky is and the mountains are. It's giving a perspective of being a little bit of an angle. But let's say I'm all done here. I can simply, when I'm done, I go apply. And remember, I came from Lightroom, leveraged the power of Luminar. As soon as I hit apply, it's going to return a TIFF version of this image back to my Lightroom catalog. So I sent over a raw image. It converted to a DNG, so there was complete lossless conversion to a digital negative. I processed it and then sent it back. And if I wanted to, I can go ahead and further tweak this within the world of Lightroom, and I'm good to go. As a matter of fact, if I switch back to my Lightroom library, and I'm going to hit the gallery view, the G key. So this was the image I sent over, and this was the image I created. I want to show you how you can leverage some of the very cool features within Lightroom, yet take that over and use the power of Luminar. Now, I've kind of pre-built one here, but I'm going to do it from scratch. It's going to take a little bit of time because Lightroom's going to have to calculate some things. But I shot this image, and I shot it as a panorama. And this was with a DJI. This was with Mavic, but I do a lot of this stuff also handheld with my Sony cameras. So I'm going to just grab all of these. I'm holding down the Shift key, selected the things that I did for the panorama. And what I want to do now is I can go up under here under photo. And one of the features of Lightroom is I can actually merge HDR images or bracketed images. I can also merge a panorama. And this is really very cool. Sometimes when I shoot stuff, I like to do bracketed images, one under, one over, and one properly exposed image as I pan my camera around. Oops, did not mean to do that because it's not bracketed. And this allows me to get amazing dynamic range in a landscape, as well as stitch them together. And then I can bring that over as a digital negative into Luminar and really bring out the colors and the details in my image. I'm going to do a photo merge of this panorama because I didn't shoot this bracketed. It's going to take a look at that. It's going to determine, it takes a little bit of time. This is probably the longest part of the process. It's, see, and you'll get this. It says unable to merge these photos. And the reason is this wasn't shot as a perspective. This was actually shot cylindrical, or with the DJI, you could shoot spherical. So now it's calculating it. Should take a moment. It's trying to find all the bits and pieces and merge them and paste them together. There we go. It did what it could. I'm going to just see if spherical gives me a little bit more because it didn't quite get this stuff here. And maybe it's because I didn't select it. So I may go back and I may have been a little bit too cautious. Yeah. Let me go ahead and hit cancel. I guess I should have grabbed all of these. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and merge those, photo merge. Here's another place you can do it as a panorama. It's going to do its calculations as fast as it can. And again, I'll have the option for it to calculate spherical or cylindrical. While I'm here, there's a couple of other settings that you might want to know about. If I choose, yeah, this was good. I now have much more of my image. If I click Create Stack, after it merges them, it will put all of the bits and pieces that I assembled into a stack, which nicely cleans up my Lightroom catalog. I could choose Auto Crop, and it's going to go ahead and crop it, which is nice. Though when I bring it to Luminar, it'll be a digital negative, so the crop or auto crop doesn't really matter. But this will just do the best it can. And this is great by itself, but I want to be able to really fix this up. And just for those who are new to this feature, there's a great little slider here called Boundary Warp. And what this does is it kind of stretches the edges so that if you're cropping, you don't lose some of the details on the side. So it's kind of a great way to cheat a little bit when working with any kind of a panorama. So I could go ahead and I could click on Merge. It's going to do all of that calculating. You can see in the upper left-hand corner. I did do a couple here earlier, but this is going to actually do this merge. You'll see this will then become a stack, which kind of cleans up my my photo. And while it's doing that, I don't know if I can open this without blowing up my machine, but I played with this image right before the webinar, and this is what I got out of it. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to squeeze in or give you an idea of how I did this. This is my after image, which is pretty cool considering what I started with. And what I started with as it created, it just did create that stack. It was this. This is what I start with. So it went ahead, it created that, it should have created a stack in here. Probably have to go to my wide shot, but let's go ahead and send this over. Now, I do want to point out that if you look at this, it is a DNG and it's ridiculously large. I think this is something like 9,000 by 12,000 pixels. So I can go ahead, right click on this. Actually, I want to do this from File. And as I did earlier, instead of sending it over with a preset, I want to actually go to Plugin Extras, and I'm going to transfer this directly to Luminar 3 as a DNG file, so I get all of that detail to work with. So it brings it in, and then I will go through and process that image. In the sake of time, so it's taking a while, as I said. This is 9,000 by 12,000 pixels. So the DNG is being created, it's being sent over. One of the things that happens when you stitch something together, it's looking at Luminar, since it is a digital negative, it's pretty much what was originally coming out of the camera. And the way this Mavic image works, it actually is a little bit distorted to square. It's actually wider than it is tall, and I can fix that really easily in Luminar before I start developing it. We saw the original image, and I'm going to go back under the Tools drop-down menu, and we saw what crop could do, but we also have something called free transform, and this is going to allow me to fix the aspect ratio of the way that this image should have been, okay? And with the auto correction that would have been done from the DJI camera. I think it looked a little bit more like this for our correction. Do not want to change my horizon there. I'm going to cheat. I think that's about what I want. And if I wanted to, I could go over here to crop. I'm switching just right from the transform tool to the crop tool. I'm going to unlock my aspect ratio and simply go down here and crop the bottom and the top to get rid of just some of this black space on the edge. If time had permitted me, I could actually use the clone and stamp tool to fill in some of this area. But for the time being, I'm going to just crop it out for the sake of this demonstration. And then as soon as I hit the Enter key, I now have my new image with the crop and the perspective fixed. But since this is a DNG, I have a lot of latitude to pull this out. Now, I could go ahead and start with the AI image enhancer. Brings these in, go ahead, open up the exposure a little bit, do a little bit of accent AI. You don't have to necessarily do that in any kind of an order. Saturation and vibrance, maybe play with that, go back to raw develop. And again, a little bit too blue, warm up the image. There we go, opening that up. Blew out my highlights there, so I could bring my highlights down or add another filter. Another filter I really love is the tone filter. And what's really great here is this smart tone, which works with the mid-range tones. And if I move it to the right, it will open up my shadows without blowing out my highlights. And if I move it to the left, it'll actually recover my highlights without crushing my shadow. So I'm starting to get a little bit more detail there. And then I can go into a split function and whatnot. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit like they do on cooking shows, where you put it in one side or one oven and you bring it out of another one. One of the things you can do in Luminar that's absolutely wonderful is once I develop this image, I can save it as my own personal look. So if I have other images I shot that day, or I really like this as a starting point, in addition to the looks that come bundled with Luminar, and you can see when you download it, you'll get these first 7 looks, and there's a whole bunch of other ones you can get free on our website. There's some additional ones we've had photographers design for us that are for sale, but all of these are the free ones that you can download. I've added a bunch of these, and Laurie will tell you about that at the end of the webinar. But in addition to that, you also have an area down at the bottom where you have your own custom looks. And here we go. These are the ones that I created. And I told you I played with this at the very beginning, right before the webinar. And this was shot in Cabo, DJI Sunset, I labeled it. And so since I saved it as a look, I can reapply it back to, I'm going to close that add filter so you can see this in all of its loveliness. I can apply all of those filters with all of those settings to this image. A great starting point, or in this case, a great processing point. And what it will allow me to do is show you the variety of filters that I was able to use to turn this image, which was our unprocessed directly out of the Mavic, out of the DJI, to, of course, this image. So I'm going to actually go ahead and turn off all of these filters and just step through them very quickly. And you can see how each one will affect or did affect our image. So, the first thing I would have done, or I did, was the raw develop. So this came in, I just opened it up a little bit. I then used the accent AI filter. I'm going to turn that on. Brought out a lot of that detail in the foreground. Added a sky enhancer, turn that on. Brought up a little more detail in the sky, the blue. There weren't a lot of clouds, just the way the light was. Added a little bit of saturation and vibrance to this. As a matter of fact, I didn't. You can see it's white. So there we go. I got caught. But if I wanted to, even at this point, since it's all looks, whether I've created them or whether you've downloaded them, you can always adjust after the fact. Added a little bit of clarity to the image. Brought in some detail here. Worked with that tone that I really liked. I liked smart toning. I'm going to turn that on. And I just brought down a little bit of the sky. added an adjustable gradient. Let me turn that on. This did a lot of work. I actually, on the very top of the image, I really played with vibrance and warmed it up in exposure. And the bottom of the image, again, I warmed up that foreground. I opened it up so we could really see what was going on and added a little bit of contrast. I think that made a huge difference in processing this image. Then I added something called the detail enhancer. And what's really cool about this, I'm going to turn this on. I want you to see what's happening in the rocks in the foreground when I turn that on. It really sharpens the image without some of the artifacts you get from sharpening. And one of the things it allows me to do is I can control sharpening or enhancing the details of my small, medium, and large details. And if you notice, I move small and medium to the right. So it really dealt with the rocks and the sand. And I move large to the left so that I don't get any of that enhancement in my sky, because I don't want crunchy clouds. I don't want sky details. I then added a really cool filter we have, which is called our sun rays filter. And what this does, and I'm going to go ahead and select that and turn it on, is it actually adds this feeling of sun rays. Now, I've played with this a little bit with our sliders, and I'm going to go ahead and set this back to its default so you can see what happens. And I'm not worried that I'm going to lose what I've done, because I'm going to hit reset. So when you first apply it, you see a sun here, and I can place that center anywhere that it should be within my image. And it actually looks at the contrast and the light and dark areas to see how the light would penetrate. I put it in its natural location here. And then what I did is, once I have it placed, I turn off Place Sun Center. I can go ahead and I can warm it up because I want it to be early morning. I could warm up the actual rays. I can control the penetration, how it goes. I can also control the look. I want it to be natural. I mean, you can always overdo things. So I'm always on the side of, what can I do to make this the most natural looking thing? And one of the things that I was bothered by is I wanted the sun to be subtle coming down here, but not on the top. So I actually went in, and once I did all my adjustments, much like I did with that layer earlier, I can also do it with my individual filters. Is I went in and I created a mask, a gradient mask that last time. So I'll go there and I simply draw that, and I made that upside down. So I tweak it. And now you don't see all those sun rays on top. You just see the sun rays on the bottom. A little bit crooked here, but guess what? I'm not going to worry about that, because I'm going to show you a really cool feature that I have with this. And that is, if I go up to the upper right-hand corner, let me go ahead and turn this off here. Okay, so I did all this stuff with the sun rays, got it kind of where I wanted to. But you'll notice at the very top of this right panel, there's a little button here called History, and I can actually see everything I've done since I brought this over from Lightroom. So the great thing here is I can see how I did something, or if I made a mistake, I can go back in time. But what I wanted to do is I actually went to this point right here, Details Enhancer, Sun Rays Enabled, and then I started messing with it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this point in history, and you can see this is how I had it when I first brought it in. Maybe I would have played with that a little bit more. So I have that. Added a little bit of split color warmth to my image. Okay, let me turn that on. And what this allows me to do is, you can see I was able to warm up the warmer areas. It actually made that sunrise or sunset actually really kind of, vibrant. And then I could take the cool or the bluer areas, and you can see I can also add more warmth or cool them down. And then finally, I added a little bit of a golden hour. Okay, just gave me that sense of like the sun coming all the way over here. And I might tweak it a little bit more. This was kind of a preset, I think, actually with when I applied the preset to this image, because I cropped it, I might want to move that up and down. Probably my adjustable gradient might be off. No, it's pretty good. So now I've processed this image. I'm really happy with it. If I had done this from scratch and I liked it and I wanted to save it as a look, which is exactly what I did, I just would go down here and I would say, save as a Luminar look, give it a name and save it. And now other images that I brought in from Lightroom would have this, I'd have the ability to just quickly apply all my settings and tweak them without having to reinvent the wheel. So now I got the image pretty much how I like it. I might actually bring down the luminance there, but this was my before, this was my after, a lot more dynamic. And now I'm done. In Luminar, I simply hit apply, and it's going to take this image, convert it to a 16-bit TIFF file, and bring it right back into my Lightroom catalog for me to work with. And that's pretty much a fast overview. Very fast. I talk quickly. Apologize. We did record this, and you can watch it again. But it gives you an idea of how nicely Luminar and Lightroom play with each other, and that you can really leverage the power of each application, and you can continue to use whatever your current workflow is and still bring Luminar into the equation. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Laurie if there are any questions, or if there isn't time for questions, she can show you where you can get some more resources.
Just a real quick question, Abba, and that is there a big difference if you start out with Lightroom and then jump over to Luminar, or if you go from Luminar over to Lightroom? Maybe you can talk about that.
I think that's a great question. And the truth is, the nice is that it depends on your workflow, on how you want to work. There are ways where you have hardly any loss. Generally, over the last year, I've been spending more and more time starting and finishing in Luminar, especially now that we have libraries. But I do have older Lightroom catalogs I use, and I absolutely love these merge to HDR, and especially the new panorama merge to HDR, where I can shoot bracketed images. And then once I do that, because I can bring it over as a digital negative, there's no loss in quality turning it into a TIFF file, and that's a beautiful workflow. The other thing I like is that there are some features I love in Lightroom. I love the fact that if I wanted to go ahead and find if I have sensor dust, it's really easy to do. It's one of the things that Adobe has done great. I can simply do that, turn on visualize spots, and once I do that, I can see if there's little spots here. And so in that case, if I know I have a dirty lens, I may go ahead and take everything into Lightroom to start with, because one of the things I can do is generally those spots on my lens on that day, they're always in the same spot. So I can fix it once, and then without doing any other modification, I can go ahead and select a whole bunch of images, and then I can simply, got to hit the Shift key, I can simply sync the corrections of fixing those spots and now send everything over to Luminar and really take advantage of the Luminar filters when they come into play.
Great, perfect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm sharing my screen now. I want to show you folks where you can find some more information after this webinar. We are recording this, but let me go ahead and start with this screen here. If you go to the skylum.com/Luminar section, or if you just click on Skylum, go over here to Luminar, this is where you're going to find a lot of great information. One of the things people were asking about is the roadmap for Luminar 3. You know, what's on the horizon? If you go under Luminar and you just select the roadmap here, you can look to see we have a new update that just came out, 3.0.2. There's things in development and also what's planned ahead. So you might want to keep a look on that. And we also have it for Windows and for the cloud. Some other things that might be really beneficial for you folks is if I go under the video gallery, I'm going to jump over here. If you wanted to find more videos that are specific about Luminar 3 and maybe Lightroom, let me see if I can grab here. I'm going to try to grab the little search there. Just go ahead and type in Lightroom. Okay. All right, so here's 3. There's an advanced Lightroom to Luminar workflow. So I think that would be really beneficial if you want to take a look at that. Also using Luminar 3 as a Lightroom Classic plugin. We do have a user guide. This has information on all the great things that Luminar 3 has for you. If you have something specific, a question that you might want to dive into, do check out the user guide. It goes through every single filter, installation, to some tips on developing images. So that's a really great resource as well. Okay, I do want to also point out that we've got We choose here. There we go. On our YouTube channel under Skylum Software, we've got a ton of videos. So whether you're interested in creating some interesting looks, for instance, Abba just did this creating a charcoal look with a portrait, you could check that out, or compositing street photography. We have new videos that are posted at least twice a week, if not more. So do take a look at this section here. This again is our YouTube channel. Skylum, just type in Skylum software. Okay, with that, everyone, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been our pleasure. And Abba, thank you so much for the great presentation. Please join us again for another webinar. We do have these every single month, a couple times, if not 2 to 4 times a month. We are really happy to bring these to you. So thanks again for joining us. And thank you, Abba.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and everybody have a nice day.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.